If your child is in a classical conversations challenge program, you know that staying in touch with what they're doing at school and during community days can be a real challenge for parents. Pun intended. Well, in this video, I'm going to give you 3 tips that I've picked up over the years to help you stay in touch with your challenge students. Hi, my name's Emily Bover. I'm a grizzled old homeschool mom who's had kids in classical conversations since 2011. I've also had the pleasure of tutoring Challenge A for 3 of my kids. And I can tell you firsthand that I had very little idea of what was going on with my challenge kids until I tutored. Because after all, challenge is about our kids growing up and taking on more responsibility for their own education, right? So how are we as parents supposed to stay involved with what they're learning? Well, the first tip I have for you is to go visit a challenge class. As parents, we understand what foundations and essentials are because we're right there in the class with our own kids. But until you sit in on a challenge class, you won't really understand what challenge is and what your child will be expected to do. It's easy to think that challenge must be like foundations and essential, only more work. But the goal of challenge is so much bigger than that. If you're familiar with the classical model of education, you know that grammar and dialectic skills are the focus of foundations and essentials. But beginning in Challenge A, the focus starts to grow into rhetoric. Rhetoric uses the stuff you learn in grammar and the skills you learn in dialectic and seeks to make something new with them. That something new, that's what happens in a challenge classroom. It's really amazing to hear the conversations and discussions that happen when challenge kids prepare for a whole week by reading good books, writing papers, and thinking about what they learned. I highly suggest that you sit in on some of those discussions and start seeing the vision of challenge. Ideally, you would do that before your kids get into challenge, but if they're already there, no sweat. Just choose a day to go in and visit one of their community days. Might want to drop a line to their tutor and ask when would be a good time to visit. Once your child starts challenge, you'll want to know how they're doing in class, and that takes us to the next tip. Tip number 2 is to ask your child specific questions about their community day. If you ask, "How was your day?" the answer that you get is going to depend mostly on the chattiness of your child and will vary somewhere between lots of information and no information at all. When I tutored Challenge, I would send out a weekly email to parents about our community day, and instead of just rehashing the material that we covered, which was something that they could find in the Challenge guide if they wanted to, I started to send out one specific question per strand that parents could use to have a discussion with their kids. The feedback I got from parents was that it worked. If your child's tutor is up for it, they can email you questions like that, but I also know how much work it is to be a tutor, so don't insist upon that. You may need to go formulate your own specific questions by looking over the course material for the week and asking what discussions came up in class. But be warned, with all of the work the challenge students do each week, you will find it difficult to keep up. And that takes us to the last tip. Tip number 3 is to help your child organize their weekly work and their daily schedule. Something I didn't fully appreciate at first is that kids need to be taught organization at a high level and at a very granular level. And even organized kids are going to have a steep learning curve when it comes to challenge. I found that if I sat down with each of my challenge kids on the first day of their week and helped them break down their assignments into daily portions, the week went so much more smoothly. Of course, an added problem of the challenge program is that unless your community day is Friday, the first day of the school week is not going to be Monday. And traditional planners that are laid out Monday through Friday were really confusing for my kids, especially those that were really visually oriented. So eventually I gave up on traditional planners and I created some of my own planners that end on other days of the week than Friday. If you're interested, I'll put links below so that you can check them out. Our community day was Monday, so I'll use the Monday planner as an example of how I helped my kids get organized. Since Tuesday was the first day of our new week, I'd sit down with each of my challenge kids for a full hour every Tuesday morning and plan for the upcoming week. First, we'd look at the monthly calendar and see if there was anything out of the ordinary that was happening for that week. Then we'd move to the weekly calendar and mark those events down so that we could work around them. Next, we'd get out the challenge guide and list the week's work here in the first column. Then we'd go strand by strand and divide the weekly work into daily portions. Lastly, we'd review the daily schedule that we'd set up, which included about 1 hour of study per strand. And then we'd set up a time to review that day's work later in the afternoon. Now, as I said, this weekly planning process took a full hour when my kids were new to it. And we would start the other days of the week with about a 10-minute session reviewing what the plan for that day was. Eventually, my kids were able to organize their weeks and their days themselves, but I recommend not rushing the process. So, yes, I admit it, all of that takes a lot of time, but I have to tell you that a weekly planning hour and a daily check-in time each morning will give you a really good insight into what your kids are learning and how they're doing in challenge. I might also add that one of my kids recently came home from her first semester in college, and she told me how much all of that forced organization time in her challenge years has really helped her manage her time in college. So the payoff here is big. All right, those are the 3 tips for staying in touch with your challenge student. Visit a challenge classroom, ask specific questions, and help them organize. If you have any questions or if you'd like to share a tip of your own, please leave it in the comments below. You might also subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.